The 19th Amendment was first introduced to Congress in 1878. 41 years later, it was passed by both houses of Congress on June 4, 1919, and sent to the states for ratification.
Women's suffrage was supported in the West and North, but strongly opposed in the South. Women had been advocating for their rights for decades before the amendment was passed, participating in marches and parades, lobbying acts of civil disobedience, silent vigils, even hunger strikes. Some met with violent resistance and suffered physical abuse and jail time.
The suffrage movement grew out of the abolitionist and temperance movements of the mid-19th century, as women involved in those efforts became politically active. In 1848, about 250 suffragists, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, gathered for the historic Seneca Falls Women's Right Conference in New York. After the Civil War, African American men gained the right to vote with the 15th Amendment.
In 1869, Susan B. Anthony and Stanton created the National Women's Suffrage Association to advocate for an amendment to the Constitution. Wyoming was the first state to grant full suffrage to women when it entered the Union in 1890, and 14 other states. Most in the West granted full suffrage by 1920.
Most states in the Midwest and Northeast granted at least partial suffrage, such as the ability to vote only in presidential elections.
Along with white women, many African American women were highly active in the women's suffrage movement.
Sojourner Truth, a former slave, became famous as both an abolitionist and an advocate of women's suffrage.
In 1851, she made her famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?"
Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women at the North, all talking about rights, the white man will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages, lifted over ditches, and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages, or over mud puddles, or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? Intellect. That's right, honey. Well, what's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man there in the black, he says women can't have much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they's asking to do it. The men better let them.